Hard to believe, isn't it, that Lent is already almost over? It seems like it just began. Next Sunday, Palm Sunday, we are at the beginning of Holy Week, and the scent of death is in the air as Jesus approaches Jerusalem. The scent of death is in the air in our readings today, too, isn't it? I'm sorry, Ruth, it isn't really funny. I'd like to be funny, but here we are. And we all try to avoid or ignore the subject of death, don't we? And even as I bring up the subject and mention the word, I imagine you flinching in your chair thinking, oh, I'm not going to go there, are we? We really don't like to talk or even think about death. And people say to me, in church, why ever not? If that isn't the place, are we ever going to talk about death? We don't like to talk about death. It's depressing. For some, it can be scary. But today, try as we might to avoid it, our text put us right in the middle of it. Beginning with Ezekiel's version of the bones of a people long dead, and damn bones, they are very, very dry. When Ezekiel was given this vision, it was during the time of the Babylonian captivity of the Israelite people. Scholars think it was about the 6th century, late 6th century BC, after the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem. Those bones at the bottom of a dry and rocky valley are thought to represent the house of Israel, without hope and very, very dead. But apparently that's not the end of the story. The vision claims that the dry bones and death are not all there is. For even though the current Israelites may feel cut off and hopeless, even though the bones are very, very dry, Ezekiel's vision promises reconciliation with the God they have deserted. It promises that God's Spirit will breathe on them and they will be revived. There will be new life for them. How often have we felt that ours were the dry bones, waiting for a fresh breath of the Spirit to give us new sinew and flesh and skin, a fresh breath of the Spirit to inspire us so that we might come back to life and living, perhaps even back to God again if we have left God. Like the Israelites, we too have often strayed from God and God's ways. We too have worshipped idols. We know what it's like to feel lifeless and without hope. Like the psalmist, we too have cried to God out of the depths of our own despair. How long, O Lord, how long will we wait for you? We have some sense of what Ezekiel is talking about. And it's not only the Israelites who have been dead. Lazarus, too, has been in a tomb. And in there, we are told, long enough for him to have a stench. Mary and Martha, his sisters, are in a state of grief, unable to fully comprehend what has happened to their brother. And why Jesus doesn't get it together and come to them now. You and I know something about that as well. Like Mary and Martha, we too have stood at the door of the tomb of suffering, pain, and death, helplessly watching as we are forced to say a final goodbye to someone we love. Wondering where Jesus is, feeling his absence when we are desperate for his presence. Perhaps there have been times when we felt like We were in the tomb ourselves, deadened by the life circumstances threatening to kill us, as we listened and prayed and prayed and listened to feel the presence of Jesus and hear his voice, and we experience only his absence. We have lamented as Mary and Martha did. We have despaired as they did when Jesus didn't come immediately. This is an emergency, Jesus, come now. Standing at the entrance to their brother's tomb, grieving, angry, uncomprehending, they couldn't take in how this could have happened to Lazarus. Where are you, Jesus? If you had been here, this wouldn't be happening. But Jesus, their friend, seemed nowhere to be found. These readings can even take us to the tombs of our own making, in which we have buried ourselves. My friend Suzanne tells a story of what she calls her living death. She was in treatment to be released from the tomb of addiction to painkillers when she describes a pivotal day in her therapy. Her therapist instructed her to get a pillowcase and fill it with rocks, one rock for every anger and every resentment she could name. Then she was to take the pillowcase with her everywhere she went until her next therapy appointment the following week. Curious, Suzanne did as she was told. It was easy, she says, for her to fill that pillowcase to the top. By the next week, she was exhausted from lugging that pillowcase around with her. This is killing me, she said to her therapist. When can I put this thing down? Her therapist smiled. Whenever you want to, she said. You're right. Dragging your anger around with you will kill you, but you aren't finished when you just put it down. Next comes the hard work of forgiving, not forgetting, but letting go of all those rocks of anger, breaking the ongoing cycle of revenge and destruction that anger can create. That too could threaten to kill you. It's necessary for you to forgive as you put the anger down, if you were to have new life. Mary and Martha were angry. Suzanne was angry. You and I get angry. But it's the hanging on to that anger that kills us. God forgives us and calls us out of the tomb of death, dealing anger to new life through loving forgiveness. We are urged to forgive as God forgives us 70 times, 7 times. Is it easy? No. But with God's help, it can happen. Tom was a lost soul. After college, he had no sense of direction. Life, his own life, seemed meaningless to him. He thought it would be fun to learn to fly, so he signed up for a 2-year tour with the Air Force. The flying was fun. The military, not so much. After his tour, he got married. He got divorced. He got bored. He drank. He remarried. He divorced again. His friend Bob told him the insurance company Bob worked for was looking to hire. Tom got a job there. He didn't like the work, but he did well. And he liked the bonuses and the stock dividends he earned. He increasingly worshiped the god of money as he climbed the corporate ladder. He bought a big house and a Porsche. He got married a 3rd time. He kept drinking. He divorced a 3rd time. He had a heart attack. He got cancer. He died at 66. His life was a living death. He could not hear Jesus calling, "Tom, come out." Such death breaks God's heart, as it broke the hearts of those who loved Tom. He was my brother. There are other tombs we experience. Those tombs that life puts us in, those unforeseen, unspeakably painful deaths in life when Jesus seems so far away, so out of reach, that we can hardly stand it. Times like the time of a miscarriage, or the death of a child, or a spouse, or a parent. Those times when the grief seems unbearable. Even Jesus is deeply moved by human grief and death as he weeps at Lazarus' tomb. Make no mistake, death of all kinds is real. Death hurts. But as Ezekiel reminds us, God's people are promised that even in the deepest valley of dark despair, God will not leave us for dead. In this earthly life, God will breathe new life into all of us and put our lives back together again. For God says, "You shall live." God broke into the community of the dead Israelites, bringing the fresh breath of the Spirit, bringing the living dead back to God and back to true life again. But as we know, history repeats itself, and since God's people, being famous for having short memories, doubted again before very long. So God sent Jesus, who stands at the tomb of every human experience, where the stench of death is unmistakable, and cries out to the one who is dying, "Come out." And he turns to those gathered around in the community and instructs them, "Unbind them and let them go." As the living dead stumble out of the tomb's darkness and into the light, their bindings fall by the wayside. The community helps tear away the wrappings of anger and fear, of loss and grief. The dead are restored to new life. My husband and I are witnesses to the truth of this unbinding and being let go. This story of Lazarus was our wedding gospel. After lifetimes of darkness and knowing many deaths, each one of us, Jesus called us out of our tombs, and our faith community unwrapped us, witnessed our wedding vows, and restored us to the unspeakably precious gift of a new start in life. In this earthly life, our self-imposed and life-imposed graves cannot hold us. Even when he seems far off, God in Jesus is among us and with us always, and in him is life. Our hope is in him now and forever. The God of love, who calls us into our very existence, calls us in our lives that we live from day to day, from death to life. In spite of the dryness and death we experience in the deepest valleys of our days, in spite of the death of our hopes and our dreams, and the hopes and the dreams of those that we love, in spite of the finality of death when our lives here on this earth are ended, Jesus, who is life, remains with us. Nothing is so dead that it keeps him from being life itself for us. here and now. And when this earthly life is finished, new life as we shine in the light of the resurrection. During Holy Week, we follow Jesus to his own death, to his tomb, through his silence and absence on Holy Saturday, before we get to Easter. We will walk through grief with him as he has walked with us. And when we meet again in his new life, we will meet in the joy and eternal hope and presence of a new Easter life for us all. For friends, dim bones, gonna rise again. Amen.
Amen.